All right, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. With me is Alex Benesch in Germany. I'm in the United States. We're going to be talking about current events in the context of the reality of friends and enemies. It's the primary political distinction. It was Carl Schmitt who said that the primary distinction in politics is friends and enemies, just like beauty and ugliness in art. And of course, we've got some things going on. I've been trying to stay optimistic about Trump and his policies, but I spent last evening with a Chinese dissident who had managed to smuggle out of China top CCP papers about what the Chinese communists think Trump's strategy is and how it is going to be destroyed and what Trump's weaknesses are. And it's quite a sobering paper because I think these Chinese analysts are, well, they're very sharp. And I think it looks like Trump is going to make the mistakes they're talking about. I hope not. I've tried to stay positive. I know there are good advisors near Trump, but I also know there are bad advisors. And the Chinese analysts have broken it down that there are three factions that make Trump's coalition, and they have infiltrated all three factions, and they're planning to create wars between the factions that hold Trump's administration together. That is among the revelations in these Chinese secret strategy papers. So with that, Alex, there's been some events in Germany. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President Vance have gone to Europe. There's been meetings. They're moving towards this bringing Europe under Trump's dominance so that we can confront Russia and make some kind of peace deal in Ukraine. The Chinese are saying, Alex, that Trump is going to betray Ukraine to get Russia to be his ally against China. That's what the Chinese think. What are you seeing in Europe? What is going on there?
Well, what I'm seeing is a very sophisticated strategy to confuse international powers such as China and the Russians, to confuse them about who is a friend to them and who's an enemy to them. This is, I think this is masterfully done. It's supposed to look unpredictable, and it's a lot of it is between the lines, a lot of it is historical context, and you either know or you don't know. So, I mean, there was of course, the Munich Security Conference and Vance creating this big splash. He was talking about, or he was saying that Europe needs to become more conservative, and he was telling about his sympathies for right-wing parties, and there shouldn't be any big issue with voting for these right-wing parties in Europe. That was on the surface. Now, at the same time, and I'll get to the Russian thing in a minute with him, that was one part of the message. The other part was this. Vice President Vance, Second Lady Usha Vance, visited the Dachau concentration camp memorial site outside Munich on Thursday. He said this: "I've read a lot about the Holocaust in books, but being here and seeing it up close in person really drives home what unspeakable evil was committed and why we should be committed to ensuring that it never happens again." Now, this is not just standard political talk, right? So the people expect me to say that. No. What actually, after World War II, right? After 1945, what really protected Europe from fascism? It was the U.S. It was the Americans. It was the intelligence community that not only fought the communists in Europe, they also fought fascists over here. So after the war, the Americans created the security infrastructure here. And there's so many documented cases of true fascist groups being broken up and exposed and destroyed one after the other. But this was never advertised that much. And this going after true fascists, this happened a lot under Republican administrations. And I'm sure more sophisticated left-wing media and left-wing people know that, but they don't want to say it, especially not now.
You have to remember, Eisenhower was the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces that occupied Germany, that formed West Germany, and Eisenhower was a big part of that.
Yeah, and it's like there's so many individual cases, but also back home. I mean, who went after the KKK groups hard? Who went after these neo-Nazi groups in the U.S. hard? It was the conservative FBI. And they had the whole COINTELPRO thing and the bending rules, sometimes breaking rules to smash these fascists domestically in the US, and Americans, they did the same in Europe, and they also taught various security agencies over here how to do that in a more or less civilized manner, in a smart manner. They fought fascism after 1945 a lot. But we're supposed
even
to forget
before,
that.
You know, people forget the House Committee, the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, which was excoriated by the left for decades as being some kind of communist, anti-communist, a bunch of nuts. You know that it started out hunting Nazis? Martin Dies, a Democrat, started the House Un-American Activities Committee in the 1930s. And he was going after not just communists, but Nazis in the U.S. and communists in the U.S. in the 1930s. But when he went after the communists, after going after the Nazis, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would call him into the White House. I think he called him in twice. And he said, Martin, don't go after the communists. They're my friends. And of course, when Pearl Harbor happened, he had to stop going after the communists because the Soviet Union was our ally. And later on, when Senator Joseph McCarthy wanted to do in the Senate what Martin Dies had done in the House, he sat down. He had a meeting with Martin Dies. There's a Democrat, Martin Dies from Texas, and a Republican, Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin. Sat down, and Martin Dies says, well, and you could probably hear his Texas drawl saying, Senator McCarthy, I would tell you not to do it, but if you're going to do it, you better be prepared because they're going to come after you.
Mm. Yeah.
You know?
And so the Russians now, especially in recent years, the Russians are now claiming to be the next big thing in fascism. They don't say it explicitly, but when they talk about being the third Rome and, you know, when they act that way domestically and internationally, they invade other countries, they treat their own people like dirt, there's a full control. There's this kleptocracy, all these people that know Putin from way back, they stole everything. So they parade around the Russians as the new big thing in fascism, and Putin is the leader. And the European fascists, they see Putin as the leader because the Europeans don't have one. There is not one person here who has that aura
Charisma?
About him.
Charisma?
Yeah, nobody has that war background and the performance, the sheer stage performance and that craziness about him and that drive and all that stuff. Nobody has that. So they're all looking at Putin as the new Führer, right? So he's the guy, and maybe we can have some little sub-Führers under Russian dominance over Europe. That's kind of where fascism is at now in Europe, anyways, and that's what it is. And so now J.D. Vance sends out this multi-level message, and people misunderstand him on purpose. But and the left is saying, there was this horrible article here in the New York Times. The headline is Vance tells Europeans to stop shunning parties deemed extreme, right? That's the headline. The New York Times should know all this background, but they don't want to say it because it hurts the Democrats. It goes against all this fear-mongering of this grand international fascist conspiracy centered around the Republicans. they don't, the truth is not useful right now to the Democrats and to the New York Times, so they don't say that. They don't say what they know. And this is where we're at right now, right? So there was this conquering the destruction of fascism, the destruction of fascism in 1945, and then there was a continuous history where America made sure that in Europe fascism would not happen again. And that has not changed. That whole program, that whole outlook has not changed. So when J.D. Vance, made this big splash and said, people shouldn't shun some of these parties, there are conditions attached to it, right? These right-wingers in Europe, they should be, or that's the implicit threat. These right-wingers in Europe, they need to be pro-Republic, they need to be pro-America, they need to be focused. None of that craziness, none of that conspiratorial fascist nonsense, right? Because the NSA knows. The CIA, all the other American agencies that are active over here, they know. If you were an AfD member years ago and you talked trash about America, the NSA put you on the list. They know your secrets. And if the Russians, when the Russians got deeper and deeper into the AfD, that was also a big risk that the Russians were taking. Because, God forbid, the NSA, CIA, some of the other agencies, the American agencies, they figure out that some AfD guy had been recruited by the Russians. This stuff can backfire on the Russians. And so this is kind of the multi-layered message that was sent. Vance was basically saying, if you're pro-America, if you're within reason, if you're loyal, we can work with you. But if you don't fulfill these conditions, we will deal with you like we have dealt with these people since 1945, rebuilding Europe. I mean, there's books on this. There's like Anton Chekhov's book, Tango Noir, where he goes into all these right-wing extremist groups, especially since 1945. And all these groups, especially German groups and all these others, these groups were always infiltrated by American intelligence. We know this. And this hasn't
these groups,
changed.
By the way, have always had certain members connected to Moscow.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the thing, you mentioned the FBI investigating the Ku Klux Klan. One of the things they discovered was the communists were in the Klan.
Yeah.
They were using it.
Because the message was, that's how far the communists were willing to go. The message, the sales pitch obviously was, man, if only the, Hitler-Stalin pact, or, it was actually called something else, but if that pact had actually worked out, Hitler and Stalin, they could have split up the world, conquered one half of the world each, and blah, 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 blah. If we can only try to recreate that magic, maybe we can make it work this time. This was the sales pitch.
After World War II, it's reported by Stalin's biographers that Stalin would sometimes go, "Oh, if only I hadn't fallen out with Hitler, we could have taken the whole world."
Yep.
He would say this from time to time. Stalin would say that. And I think Hitler learned from the Marxists. He created his National Socialism because he said, look, people will fight for their nation, but they're not going to fight for these abstract Marxist ideas. So socialism is good, Hitler said, but we're going to make it national socialism. And Hitler had this, used anti-Semitism, and he realized he could control a country if he could get the far right and the far left together. So the Nazi Party was a far right and a far left party. Hitler said that some of the best Nazis were former communists, right? He would say this. And so what did he do? He appealed to the far left by being a socialist. he appealed to the far right by being a Nazi. And the anti-Semitic thing, if you read Mein Kampf, what Hitler says is he says, well, you can't tell the German people that they have all these enemies. Look at World War I. We're fighting France and Britain. We're fighting Russia. We're fighting America. We're fighting Romania and Italy. We're fighting everybody. Germany's completely surrounded by enemies. And we can't fight these people. And so he said, you got to reduce it all to one enemy. He says this in Mein Kampf. So guess what one enemy it is that they reduce all their enemies to? It's the Jews. Mm-hmm. That's what the whole formula of anti-Semitism is. This is a very cynical admission in Mein Kampf by Hitler. And so what he does is he says, okay, how are all these enemies of Germany one enemy? And he says, well, it's Jewish finance capital out of New York and London. The West is Jewish finance capital, capitalism, and now I mean that's the enemies out there. And what is the Soviet Union? It's Jewish Bolshevism, mm-hmm. right? So all the people that Hitler ends up fighting, because he ends up fighting the whole world. We called it the United Nations. The United Nations was the alliance that defeated Hitler and the Japanese. That whole alliance, it's all just the Jews, right? Yeah. It's crazy. But that's what he did. He reduced it to what we just have to destroy the Jews and the whole world will just go away and stop bothering us. It's just crazy.
So what here in this New York Times story, it says this. Now, it says, Mr. Vance punctuated the message by meeting on Friday with Alice Weidel, the AfD's candidate for chancellor in this month's election, as well as other German leaders. Altogether, it was an unusual intervention in the domestic politics of a democratic American ally. Well, hold on a second. Miss Alice Weidel, I mean, we talked about this before. She's a woman, she's lesbian, her partner is like darker skinned or has like a foreign background. We can pretty much guess that Alice Weidel, she doesn't like the freaks in the party. She doesn't like the actual fascists in the party, and they don't like her either, right? Because there's some distinctive characteristics where you can separate a sort of normal AfD person from a truly fascist AfD person, because the party has shifted before and they may shift again. So there's like your average hardline conservative, kind of like somebody who would like the Republican Party in America, and then there's actual fascists. So you can make that distinction, and I think that the United States has a pretty good idea of who is who in the AfD, who is what in the AfD. So this is meeting with Alice Weidel
No,
from the AfD.
Hold on, Alex. Just a question so people understand the relevance of this. The election in Germany is this month.
Yes.
How many days away? We just passed Valentine's Day, the middle day of the month, the 14th. Today's the 15th. We're broadcasting this. When is the election?
What is the actual date? I mean, I got the mail ballots.
You got the mail ballots. You don't know the date.
I don't
Is
go
it
out.
next weekend? Is it next weekend?
Was it next weekend? I mean, I do the mail thing.
Well, look, we can look. I'm just curious. I'm going to bring it up here. I'm going to look and see what it says here. I'm going to Google it. German elections and 2025 elections. Of course, they don't tell me the date.
Well, it's very soon. It's very soon, and
I know 23rd of February, held in Germany on the 23rd of February, 2025. Elect 630 members of the 21st Bundestag, and so the 23rd. So today is the 15th. That is a week from tomorrow, right?
Yeah, and so the New York Times is calling Vance's comments meddling. Oh, this is foreign meddling. He's manipulating an election in Germany by just saying a few things. Even though, you know, this is a complete double standard, you know, when before the Ukraine war, when political leaders here would get praise from the Russians or they would get praise from the Chinese and nobody said a word. right? And there was talk of new trade and all that. That's not meddling, especially before an election. But if a Republican actually says something, then that's called meddling. Well, as I said, the real meddling that's been happening for generations, the real American meddling in our elections is making sure that communists don't win, and making sure that fascists don't win, and making sure that this thing doesn't spin out of control. And then, of course, almost simultaneously, Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife visited the Dachau concentration camp memorial site outside Munich on Thursday. They set the line. They don't just say where the line is. They set the line. These Americans, they enforce that line. Then the New York Times says this. Well, they quote a lot of European German politicians who were outraged, of course, very, very outraged. Blah, 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 blah. And then it says this. While the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. He added, what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States. There you go. That's what matters. Of course he takes the Russian threat seriously. I mean, there's a story from the Wall Street Journal. This is a couple of days old. It's an exclusive story. J.D. Vance wields threats of sanctions, military action to push Putin into Ukraine deal. Vice President J.D. Vance said Thursday that the U.S. would hit Moscow with sanctions and potentially military action if Russian President Putin won't agree to a peace deal with Ukraine that guarantees Kiev's long-term independence. He talked about economic tools of leverage, military tools of leverage, blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, there's like a multifaceted message here, right? So he's basically saying, let the experts deal with the Russian threat, the Chinese threat, the external threat. But there also has to be a countering of the internal threats in Europe, and so they have to clean house. They have to get rid of the ideological crazies in politics and the traitors and all these people that want to just transform society into something crazy, something that is not aligned with the values of the United States. So this is how you can create outrage. And I posted a piece on counterintel.com recently just to get straight what fascism actually means, because the word is thrown around a lot by the left. Everything to them is, they don't like is fascism and a fascist conspiracy. But what does it actually mean to be a modern fascist, right? And so when let me just pull that up real quick on the screen so people can see that. Now, this is the piece that I wrote here. It's called The Essence and Self-Destructive Nature of Fascism. So fascism, the word is thrown around a lot. Any big business person supporting the Republican Party is called a fascist, but every big business person doling out cash to the Democrats is labeled a progressive, a philanthropist, climate-protecting warrior for the working class. See, that's what the framing is. Now, leftist control freakism is called liberation, but any traffic light under conservative control is called fascist oppression. So it's clear we need some usable definitions for the term fascism in order to tell who really has a fascist agenda and what that precisely means. So how about this? Modern age fascism considers the Enlightenment to be a mistake that has to be reversed. Capitalism, individual liberty, various forms of republics, democratic elements of that republic, etc. That's what it's about. And so these modern day fascists, they're saying everything was much better in the old times. We need to go back to these old times. It was a magical time, and everybody was so focused, and then it all went bad because of republics and the Enlightenment and the United States. They made everything bad, right? That's what fascists truly believe, and they say that fascists now say that leadership became broken up and chaotic in the Enlightenment era. Individual citizens became involved in politics, and they have no vision, no sense of empire. Capitalists were either short-sighted and self-serving or a conspiracy/Jewish conspiracy of their own. And of course, the emergence of modern fascism happened parallel to the cultivation of modern conspiracy mythology. So by blaming Jews per se, or mainly a few selected bankers, such as the Rothschilds, fascists can trash fundamental freedoms and individualism without directly saying they want the masses to be enslaved or, to be precise, in a state of perpetual serfdom. Right? So this is kind of what fascists are about. So reestablishing the pre-Enlightenment structures is the core of the fascist agenda. And the rest is up for debate among the fascists. Should it be a Christian church, like a strong Roman-type church, or should it be ancient mystery cults? This, that, or the other. This is kind of the only thing that's left up for debate with these fascists. And so this kind of core concept of fascism, let's just do it the old way and smash everybody who disagrees. This is kind of the self-destructive nature of fascism. This is why they lost so much, the fascists. This is why they couldn't really function. And so this is kind of the difference between, let's say, a J.D. Vance, who knows these things. This is the difference between a J.D. Vance and somebody else, right? Somebody else who wants to turn back the clock, who wants to destroy all the new things that happened, since the Middle Age, after the Middle Ages. This is how we make a useful distinction, but the New York Times doesn't want to make that distinction. They just say, well, J.D. Vance just told the crowd at the Munich Security Conference that, we should work with right-wing parties. So there's proof, the New York Times implies, that this is all a fascist conspiracy. But guess what? I mean, every president of the United States has the Insurrection Act. I mean, this was there in the first Trump admin. This Reagan had it. Bush Sr. had it, Bush Jr. had it, Nixon had it, Eisenhower had it. They all had the Insurrection Act, but they never started a fascist dictatorship. It never happened. Instead, they fought a lot with the intelligence community to destroy these right-wing extremist groups. That's what's happening. That's what's happening here. And then there was, and then there was this. On Ukraine, Vance said it was too early to say how much of the country's territory would remain in Russian hands for whatever span of time, or what security guarantees the US and other Western allies could offer Kiev. He said those details would need to be worked out in the peace talks. Vance said the Trump administration would aim to persuade Putin that Russia would achieve more at the negotiating table than on the battlefield. This is a clear message because the Russians went bankrupt before. This is how the Cold War was won, not really fully on the intelligence side, obviously. That still has to be won. But in terms of production, the Soviet Union clearly lost. They screwed up, and this was there was no World War III, luckily, and it took a lot to get to that point, right? To make the Russians understand that this violence would not get them what they want to get. So Vance didn't say much. He doesn't want to show the cards. He doesn't want to give away the cards. And then, of course, Vance and his wife visited the Dachau concentration camp memorial site outside Munich, and both Joe Biden, Obama, Mike Pence, and many others, they visited this memorial site. Vance laid a wreath with a red, white, and blue ribbon stenciled with "We Remember" and "United States of America" in Boston gold lettering. Inaugurated in 1968, the monument was designed by Nandor Glid, who was persecuted as a Jew by the Nazis in his home country, Yugoslavia, and joined the resistance to Nazi occupation forces. Quote, "I am really moved by this site," the vice president said in subsequent comments. He said, "It's very important that it's here, and it's very important that those of us who are lucky enough to be alive and can walk around can know what happened here and commit ourselves to do everything to prevent it from happening again." Okay, everything, right? This is not negotiable. Now, who's the leading fascist now, or who's seen as the new Führer, who's seen as the new leader of international fascism? That person is Vladimir Putin. He is seen as the fascist Führer.
Yeah. The thing about this is what Dugin's doing. Look, the whole Eurasianist thing that Dugin does. Eurasianism was Karl Haushofer, the teacher of Rudolf Hess, who taught this to Hitler. Geopolitics. And what the Russians have done with Dugin is in the 1990s, the Russian General Staff picked this up. And Dugin himself admits in his book, The Last War of the World Island, that it was the communist who supposedly hated Boris Yeltsin, who picked this thing up. Now, he doesn't call them communists. He says the elements opposed to Boris Yeltsin. Well, what elements were that? Boris Yeltsin was posturing as the drunken clown liberal in Russian politics. Of course, he had been a former candidate Politburo member. He was an old communist himself. And Boris Yeltsin made a speech on Soviet TV before the fall of the Soviet Union saying, well, we have to, this word socialism is perfectly good, as in Soviet socialism. We just have to put it aside for a while. If you listen to Boris Yeltsin carefully, he was the next stage in persuading the West that Soviet communism had disappeared. But you see, they picked up this geopolitics, and it's straight out of the Third Reich. And the people that Dugin is, with this Arctos publishing, the people he's appealing to, the alt-right in Europe, are people who kind of have these fascist or neo-fascist or neo-Nazi dreams. Am I mistaken in that, Alex?
Yeah, and also there's, I see a message there, a little bit between the lines. I mean, people don't have to be geniuses, I think, to see that message.
But you see... Yeah, but you see, the thing is that our problem is that people don't have discernment now.
Yeah, but
for some reason they fall for this stuff.
But this whole thing was planned. I mean, the stuff that Vance said at the Munich Security Conference, this was all pre-planned. This was all strategic
because it had the subtext of going to the former Nazi concentration camp, right?
Yeah, and he's speaking to different audiences because everybody's listening. Everybody was listening when he was talking. So some of the people that were listening were influential Russians who are part of that Russian system, but Russians who don't like Putin, who don't like the escalation, Russians who would like to have something that's more similar to the United States, because they remember the good times, in some of the 2000s, right, when things seemed calm and the Russians could make money and they could They could buy soccer teams in England, and their children would go to Western
Well, that was
universities.
the KGB oligarch who bought the soccer team in England.
Yeah.
Look,
But they,
look,
there's a variety of Russians that don't like that risk. They don't like the craziness, and this is sort of a message I think sent by Vance saying, if you can meet us at least halfway, and if you can help us to get rid of these crazy people in Russia, maybe there's a deal to be worked out. Maybe there's some way of living on this planet that's acceptable, right? So he's also sending a message to the Russians, which weakens, I think, the position of Putin and some others, because Putin wants to tell his people on television, all available channels, Putin wants to tell the people, it's either me, my leadership, or total disaster. You can either choose me or disaster. And when Vance is saying these things, then it weakens Putin's position, because I think many Russians, even average Russians, will say there is another option here. It's not just Putin or Armageddon. There's other options too, right?
well, let me. I have to introduce something, and of course, this is the question when you talk about the subtext. There's a two-sidedness to what we're seeing out of the Trump administration. There's the we're going to use Russia. We're going to make peace in Ukraine so Russia can be our ally against China, and this is favored in MAGA. This is favored on the tech right with people like Elon Musk, supposedly. And then there's and so the only faction, Trump, I have these two Chinese papers that Mr. Wang of Luda Media gave me last night, and I had them translated yesterday, later last night. And what these papers say is stunning. The Chinese say in their strategy papers, we have infiltrated the three factions of Trump's coalition. Those factions are MAGA, the tech right, and the old Republican establishment. We've infiltrated all three of them. The Chinese have. And we're going to make them fight each other. But we have analyzed Trump's weaknesses. And Trump, we no longer think Trump is unpredictable. We were wrong about that. Trump is very predictable. And here's his faults. He has overweening pride and confidence. Because of the assassination attempt, he believes that he's God's instrument, which makes him less able to understand, to take in criticism when he's making a mistake, so he doesn't catch himself. And we are feeding Trump this information through our agents in these groups. And that anybody in these groups that goes against our line that we're feeding him, we'll just hammer them. So we've got this lockhold in around Trump. Basically, I mean, I'm sort of interpreting how it reads. And so what the first paper says, okay, Trump is going to make this mistake. Trump wants to basically give up Ukraine. He's going to sell out Ukraine to get Putin to be his buddy against China. That's what the first paper basically says is Trump's plan. Now, this must be from their agents on the inside. Where are they getting this from? And they say, Trump thinks he can win everything from negotiations, and he's not as good as he thinks he is. He doesn't understand things, and he has this overweening pride, and he thinks that he's the instrument of God. So Trump is basically lost it, right? And basically there's going to be a war. There's coming. They say there's this coming confrontation with America that China must prepare for. And so, in the second paper, okay. So the first paper is saying what the CCP is thinking about Trump. This is what he's going to do. And the second paper says, oh, we're full of confidence because Russia is not going to turn against us. Russia is going to promise Trump whatever he wants to hear. But Russia's on China's side. Russia's not going to turn against the CCP, the communists. Russia is run by secret communists. Putin is a communist. Whatever he pretends, he wears a cross, pretends to be a Christian, has Tucker Carlson eating out of his hand.
Yeah.
But he's not. And he's going to cheat Mr. Trump. This is what these two papers are saying. And if it's true, it's terrifying. Now, the question for you, Alex, having watched the vice president, do the Americans know what the Chinese think, what the Russians are going to do to trick them? And are the Americans leading the Russians and Chinese on, leading them to believe that Trump is going to do this, and then Trump's going to pull the rug out from under them at the last minute? I mean, which is it? Which is it?
I think this is an area, if we draw comparisons and trying to figure out if there's a pattern of rug pulling, because that was because I always give these episodes of Friends and Enemies a specific title so people can kind of remember which episode was what, because it's easier than just numbering the episodes. And the title I had in mind for today's show was rug pull, because there's been such a precedent when it comes to rug pulling or blindsiding an opponent, and that was the, I think, strategic behavior in very high circles of the United States, also tech circles or right-wing tech circles. Some of the early behavior of these Americans toward the early Nazis, right? This was when Henry Ford was publishing this crap about the Elders of Zion.
The Dearborn Observer in Michigan, Henry Ford was publishing the pro-Nazi, anti-Semitic crap about the stuff right out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah, and
right?
the Eternal Jew and the essay collection and the fake protocols of Zion and all that nonsense. And then, of course, you had some people from General Motors who were giving like these awards to Nazis. That was the early Nazi days, by the way, of course. Standard Oil, they sold some very important technology to the Germans. This was about creating better gasoline. So you could.
The Germans were developing. I guess we developed together with the Germans the artificial rubber, with synthetic rubber for tires.
Synthetic rubber.
Were we working with them on gasoline, on special petroleum, synthetic petroleum?
This was like Standard Oil had a method of creating, I think it was additives to gasoline or airplane fuel, so it would get a higher octane. So it would get more octane. So you could add the superchargers to these engines, especially airplanes. So you could get more power out of the engines. But if you have a fuel that has less octane, there would be vibrations in the engine, and you could destroy the engine.
Yeah.
But if it's high octane, you can just drive these things harder and fly higher at these altitudes with more power and such. So there was some key technology sold to the Nazis. Then you had all these joint ventures. There was General Electric. I think they had a thing with the Allgemeine Elektrizitätswerke, AEG, Germany. So there was this kind of this business stuff going on, and there was public talk, right? Some of these American business leaders were saying positive things or encouraging things about the Nazis, but all that did was give American intelligence, which I think was bigger at the time as it's publicly known. I think that gave American intelligence a bigger window into Germany. It made it possible to infiltrate Germany better, which was very important. And then America's political world, they said for a long time America would not get involved again in Europe. I mean, after World War I, we would not get involved again. We have no interest in getting involved.
Yeah, there was a huge reaction against the war.
And the Nazis believed it. And the Nazis believed that, and they believed they had all these American friends who were saying nice things about the Nazis. So the Nazi leadership would not even hire experts on American matters. They thought we know enough about these Americans. We don't need more expertise. And then came the rug pull. Then came the blind side. This is when all these apparent friends turned their backs on the Nazis, and they started producing for the war effort, outproducing everyone. And the Nazis lost. And I think the whole story has never been told, because it's always just this left-wing interpretation of, every capitalist is really a fascist at heart, and these American corporations, they're all fascist,
Well,
blah, blah, blah.
The Americans played such a trick on the Nazis. I think we've talked about this. Charles Lindbergh, and this hasn't come out yet, and I've seen this. Charles Lindbergh, who pretended to be pro-Nazi, who had a German mistress, I think, on the side, was part of the deal. Charles Lindbergh was an American spy, spying on the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
That he sacrificed his own reputation to get close to the Nazis for the U.S. government.
Ernst Hanfstaengl.
To learn what they were doing.
Yeah. And there were people like Ernst Hanfstaengl and others who were really, really important with the Nazis. But then at some point, even the Nazis suspected them of spying for the West.
Well, Ernst Hanfstaengl was half American and half Bavarian.
Yeah.
But in the case of Ernst Hanfstaengl, he was never a spy. Although they suspected him, they were probably planning to kill him. If you read Hanfstaengl's biography, he was very close to Hitler, by the way, Ernst Hanfstaengl. Putzi, they called him, because he was such a big guy, and he would play the piano. He was a beautiful pianist, and he would soothe Hitler by playing Wagner, And in fact, he came up with some of the Sieg Heil stuff because he borrowed it from American football games.
Great.
He actually took some of the stuff, where they play in American baseball games, da-da-da-da-da-da, where the organ goes. Yeah. And he took that stuff and they added it to Hitler's, rallies and so on. But Hanfstaengl ended up in a British internment camp because he had fled to Great Britain to escape assassination. I guess Hermann Göring was tasked with killing him. According to him, it's hard to understand the story, but yes, the Nazis became paranoid of the Americans, and of course, rug pulling, pull the rug out from under. The thing is that the instincts of Americans, and also it's true for Britain too, whatever right-wing sympathies we might have, or even left-wing sympathies for the poor, sympathies for the old aristocracy or old ideas. Whatever sympathies we have in either way, Americans and British, left or right, in our core, in our Anglo-Saxon core, there is this Anglo-Saxon desire for liberty, the yeoman farmer. Hey, we're independent. We think for ourselves. We want checks and balances. We like, the idea of the British monarchy being a limited monarchy with checks and balances, where Parliament has two houses and they each have a veto in each other. The House of Lords can veto, the House of Commons can veto, the king has his power. In America, we replicated that in our Constitution, and with federalism added in as another control. So we like our freedom, we like limited power, we don't like the giant centralized states. We're suspicious of that, right? Go back to the Magna Carta. This is very Anglo-Saxon. So whenever there's these flirtations in America or Britain with this stuff, there's always going to be this counter movement away from it in the mind, in the English mind, because it's really in our language, it's in our souls.
You mentioned these three factions that make up the Trump current universe, right? And the Chinese have identified these groups, and they have infiltrated these groups, and they're trying to use that to their advantage. But wasn't it kind of that rug pulling the British did against the Nazis, where they had all these three fake factions, and one of these factions played the part of loving the Nazis and wanting to work with the Nazis, but these three factions, this was a fake construct. This was made. Well, it even lured Rudolf Hess to Scotland, where he jumped out of a plane with a parachute, broke his leg, ends up in captivity. This is the third highest Nazi official being in captivity. I mean, imagine the secrets in his head, right? Yeah, I mean, if you do that, if you do that theater for long enough, right? We know all these things when British aristocrats. They made pro-fascist statements, or there's even video footage of royals making the Nazi Hitler salute, and all this stuff in the newspapers. Yeah, maybe the Germans are right. Maybe they know better than we do. Blah, 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 blah. Lord Rothermere, we talked about this in the last episode if people haven't seen it yet. Lord Rothermere with the Daily Mail, which was a really powerful newspaper at the time. The Daily Mail praising Mussolini, praising Hitler, and having all this stuff going on. But this was pretty much part of that bigger ruse that was that was written about by a few authors, like Luke Kilzer in Churchill's Deception. Not many people looked at it.
Luke Kilzer's books are good. I should add here now, it's very, Mr. Wong of Luda Media was saying, look, this is not what I think's going on in the Trump administration. This is what the CCP strategists, the communists in Beijing, think Trump is going to do. And they're really convinced that Trump is this blundering fool now who is going to sell out Ukraine and is going to try to get Russia to align with him and going to get caught in this deception. And in the second paper, apparently, they clearly see this as a Russian-Chinese deception on America. Now, what you say about the rug pulling, in my own experience, and I could be wrong, my experience is limited of these higher people in government, but I got a chance to meet a friend of Elon Musk's. I fell into having breakfast with him, and then I had afternoon conversations with him, and I had dinner with him. And he's got a Q clearance. And I'm asking him, well, doesn't Elon Musk have a factory in Shanghai, and doesn't that compromise him? And it's like, he just dismissed all that. Oh, no, it's not. Don't worry. Why? So the question is that, and then in this paper, according to Mr., I've just had it translated. I haven't had a chance to study it, but according to Mr. Wong, in this paper, the Chinese say, we can put pressure on Elon Musk because he's got this factory in Shanghai, right? And it's like, is this like the Lucky Lindy, Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford and these other people being pro-Nazi or seeming to be in the 1930s? Is this the same kind of thing? And all of a sudden, they're really not? And I don't know. And the same thing, you look at Steve Bannon and Jack Posobiec, and it's interesting. This is kind of weird. You see, the thing about Steve Bannon is that he has this relationship with Miles Guo, who, by the way, according to Mr. Wong, Miles Guo is a high-level CCP agent. So you have this accusation of Mr. Wong against Miles Guo. And then you have Steve Bannon taking, Teitelbaum in his book, The War for Eternity, says that Steve Bannon has taken more than $1 million for Miles Guo. And then you have, Steve Bannon's secret meeting in November of 2018 with Alexander Dugin in Rome, just around the corner from Julius Evola, the Italian fascist. Well, he wasn't technically a member of the fascist party, but Julius Evola, he's a very right-wing, alt-right thinker, right? I mean, he's a big guy on the right now in Europe. Yeah, everybody's copying him. Everybody's reading his books. The traditionalist thing. Dugin uses Evola. So, but what's really interesting about Steve Bannon and Jack Posobiec is that they were naval intelligence guys.
Yes.
They were intelligence.
Yes.
Isn't this kind of funny?
They're
These two guys are intelligence guys, and then they're working with people who are accused of being, Dugin is a former KGB agent, according to his biographer. He was recruited by the KGB. He worked for Russian intelligence. He's part of the Russian information warfare game. And then there's the accusations against Miles Guo by this major Chinese dissident, Mr. Wong. So it's interesting. Is Steve Bannon a dupe of Chinese? Is he a MAGA controlled agent of China, as the Chinese seem to imply in their paper. They're talking about, we've infiltrated MAGA. Well, who have they infiltrated? Who are their infiltrators? Are those infiltrators rug pullers? Have they just tricked the Chinese into believing that they're doing this? And at the last minute, the Chinese are going, oh, wait a minute, these guys aren't really on our side. We paid them all this money and they're cheating us, right? Yeah. Who's cheating who in this wilderness of mirrors?
I've done some.
You don't know.
Over the years, I've done some. I've done original research on some very sophisticated rug pulling in the 1800s even. So this was when. This was when Europe, or at least the European mainland, excluding Britain, because Britain was its own thing, global empire, getting into the Enlightenment and all that. But Europe couldn't quite decide what to do in these new times, right? France couldn't decide, are we still an empire? Do we really try this republic thing? Maybe we should try out.
Well, they ended up with Napoleon III, so they ended up being an empire, a republic that basically just went back to being an empire, right?
So they couldn't they couldn't figure out what they really wanted to be. Then the Germans were a mess anyway, and in other countries they couldn't figure it out either, right? So in the 1800s, this is when we saw the emergence of these really big emergence of these ideologies such as socialism. It actually became a powerful movement. You saw communism, and you also saw the new right wing, the modern fascism. It wasn't called fascism in the 1800s, I think, but this counter movement to the Enlightenment. People that said Enlightenment is terrible, everything about it is terrible. We need to just restore everything to what it was in the past, and it all needs to be so pure Roman, and not a new single thought can enter this mindset, and we will squash anybody who thinks differently. So this is when this anti-Enlightenment counter movement really took off in the 1800s, and you saw these organizations creep up. And it's pretty much the same as you would think of today. Viral memes, right? Anti-Jewish memes or cultural memes.
Anti-Semitism really emerged in the 19th century. It really did, yes. And especially among the Pan-Germans. It was kind of incubated there. And the French had it too.
It was like an internet meme. It's like you find the right graphic and the right slogan, and it just takes off, and people copy it, and it becomes a thing. What we think of as an internet meme, that was kind of common in the 1800s, with paper and printing presses.
With newspapers.
Cheap pamphlets, and cheap pamphlets and everything. So same techniques, and so you saw these groups springing up everywhere. The so-called völkische Organisationen, these super right-wingers, right? So these guys, these groups popped up everywhere, and they had more members, and they had viral successes with their propaganda, and they were spreading the message, just like you saw today. And when you look really closely, you can see sort of the infiltration of that new right-wing movement in the 1800s, especially in Germany and Austria. You can tell that British intelligence was in there a lot, right? And so this is sort of a deception that was done for a few decades, and then it fully paid off. I mean, it paid off even in the 1800s, because this extreme right-wing stuff, this slowed down Germany's development, right? And Germany was a competitor to England, right? So it had an effect of slowing down Germany, slowing down Austria, confusing Germany, confusing Austria. And then this deception really paid off when the Nazis became a thing, and you had to sell this theater to the Nazis, and the Nazis would actually believe the British theater because of all that backstory going a few decades back. So the Nazis thought, the British have been thinking like us, or a section of Britain, they've been thinking like us for many decades, so obviously they're our friends. I mean, that's how they've been for half a century.
One of the key counterintelligence tricks is mirroring.
Yeah.
And spies use it. You look at the other person and you reflect back. You mirror them. You reflect back what they're saying or thinking to get them to believe you're on the same page with them, so that then you can introduce something, to manipulate them. And psychopaths do this, by the way.
Yeah.
Psychopaths will mimic the person opposite because that's all they know how to do to manipulate, because they don't actually have affect. So they don't feel the other person. They just study them and why, okay, I'm going to do this. He's doing this. He's crying. I'm going to cry. Or he's laughing. I'm going to laugh. This creating this sympathy between the two sides. So you always have to be careful about that. But yeah, so you're thinking when you're watching this, and some of this could be instinctual. Everything human beings do. This is a point I made about Trump on my site, because a lot of my readers were like, oh, Trump is bad. He's made, Trump in this last week has made some statements about Ukraine that are, if you want Ukraine to survive and you really have your sympathies are with Ukraine, and mine are, you're thinking, oh, that's terrible. He said some bad things about Zelensky should not have gone into this war. It's like, well, Zelensky was attacked. He didn't have a choice. Ukraine, what is this? This is such bizarre rhetoric coming from Trump. And it really, a lot of my readers were affected by it. And I watched all these statements. I watched Trump's press conference before Tulsi Gabbard was sworn in. And I looked at it and I go, these are just words.
Yeah.
He might mean what he's saying. They might be significant. It might be really bad news, just like my readers think. But then again, they're just words. What is he going to do?
Exactly.
And that's the thing, is that I've watched too many times. Look, this is what I tell people over and over again. Remember the dispute with Little Rocket Man back in 2017? Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, the little fat boy. There's this dispute, who has a bigger button, right, to push with nukes. And Trump is just doing this to him. And then all of a sudden they become buddies. And they're best of friends. And Trump goes to Hanoi to meet with Kim. And they're going to make a deal. And you can see Kim is counting the cash, right?
Yeah.
He's going to get something out of Trump. Trump is going to give him some goodies from the goodie basket. And Trump goes there and it's all fun and good. And then Trump goes, I don't think I'm going to give you anything. And then he just leaves.
It just goes away.
And that's it. And Kim is like, like a deer in the headlights. What does Kim do? He executes a bunch of his diplomats. You failed me. You promised me. You said, like these vicious dictators do. And it's like Trump did that. The only other American president who walked away from a summit and gave the communist dictator nothing was Reagan when he met with Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland. And what was that, 1985, 86? I think it was 85. It was the first meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan did it right. He walked away. He didn't give him anything. And it was a crushing thing for the Soviets to experience this. Because when they met with Nixon, when they met with Carter, when they met with, Ford, these previous presidents, a summit meant they were going to get what they wanted. They were going to get an ABM treaty, a SALT I treaty. They were going to get everything they wanted. But this was different. They were just completely baffled. Why didn't he give us anything?
And also, wasn't there, at least the feeling of a blind side and a rug pull on the Russian side when they failed in their initial plan of quickly taking over Ukraine, right? Because that was kind of the calculation. We can do it quickly and we can tell the world it's done and over, deal with it. Maybe we can... If you give us what we want, maybe we can treat Ukrainians better that we now control. Maybe we can make a deal that way. That was the initial expectation of the Russians.
And yes, and the Kremlin thought that if we defeat Ukraine quickly in a matter of a couple of weeks, the West will just say, we don't care. Nothing we can do about it. We'll just have to do business with Russia. And of course, the Germans wanted the pipeline. They wanted the gas. And so, what can we do? But it didn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Talk about a rug pull or a disappointment.
And who was in charge? Who was in the White House what man was in the White House when there was this training preparation going on, even internationally, with Ukrainians to teach Ukrainians the modern battlefield, getting them away from the old Soviet training, and rotating Ukrainians through that new training system. So when the invasion finally happened, Ukrainians could quickly adapt to the new warfare. Who was in the White House when a lot of that training for Ukrainians took? I forgot the name, what the operation was called, but
well, the training, I think, am I right? From my reading, the training took place mostly in the United Kingdom. I think that's where most of these Ukrainian officers.
And
there was some in some other NATO countries. Yeah,
but it was Trump. It was Trump in the White House. He was signing off.
Yes.
He was signing off of fact, some pretty significant operations that helped defend
Ukraine. And it was
Ukraine.
Trump was the first American president to really authorize NATO to go ahead and give weapons to Ukraine, because under Obama, oh no, it was only humanitarian assistance. We're not giving Ukraine any weapons.
Yes.
Obama would not do that, right? And when you look at what's coming out now with Zelensky saying, hey, we didn't get 100 million of this. And I'm sure the Ukrainians know how to count, right? The claim now, General Kellogg is saying, well, they don't know how to count. And we were really spending the money here. But no, the Ukrainians know how to take that into account. They know we had to build factories to send them extra ammunition. But they went 5 months without receiving anything from us a year ago. 5 months without a single supply shipment from the United States. So the Ukrainians know how to count. And what General Kellogg, he's contradicting himself now. But last April, he told Radio Liberty that Biden's supplies to Ukraine were token. 31 tanks, he said. How many fighter planes? What real weapons did we send to Ukraine? 20, 30 HIMARS? Come on. Compared to what we could have sent them, we could have devastated Russia, right? But we do have to be careful, right? Because the Russians have nukes and they can decide, because they're psychopaths. They don't care how many people they kill. And they could unleash something, right?
And I think there's also, when it comes to Ukraine and Ukrainian territory, there's also another dimension to this. We saw how Russia struggled with the newly acquired territory by scheming in force, such as Crimea, losing a ton of money and just exposing themselves quite a bit, because when you have Crimea, when you try to have your navy over there, and then your navy keeps losing against Ukraine, which barely even has a navy or doesn't really have a real navy, it's like the more Russia bites off of this apple, the more Russia gets itself into trouble.
It's almost like taking a poison pawn.
Yeah. So before I forget this thought, we might actually, if there's a deal soon, right? And this deal says that, well, the Russians can, do this, do that, and the other, and it looks bad for Ukrainians. Maybe that's gonna get the Russians even more into trouble, because ultimately, Ukraine is a very flat country, and it's hard to defend, or it's hard to operate on flat territory. So maybe less is more when it comes to Ukrainian territory, because the Russians can truly self-sabotage over this area, and so it's whatever deal happens, we will have to look at that deal very, very precisely and have to project into the future what might have been the strategy behind that deal, right? Because it may look like one thing initially, but it may turn into something else, and this may have been the strategy all along. So this is how much people have to be focused when it comes to these things. There's so many scenarios, and there's so many moving parts involved and people involved, and they all have a different level of information. Everything is on a need-to-know basis. And I think that some people that play a part in a rug pull, some people, they don't know about the rug pull. They just play their part for various reasons, and that's how it's going to work. Because if everybody involved in the rug pulling knows it's a trick, it may leak prematurely.
But what Mr. Wong says is interesting. He says, look, this is not what I'm saying Trump's going to do. This is what the CCP strategists think, based on their intelligence. Now, their intelligence might be right. You and I might be imagining a rug pull, but there isn't one. And let me go through what the Chinese strategists think Trump's weaknesses are. Well, they say they have penetrated his team. They understand the three factions that hold up his thing, and they're going to sabotage Trump's faction. They're going to cause him to waste all of his energy mediating fights between the tech right, MAGA, and of course the establishment Republicans. We've already seen the fight over the visas between the tech right and the MAGA, right?
H-1B,
the H-1B visas. We've already seen that fight, but wait a minute, what happened to it? It kind of went away. It's interesting, and then it's like, and of course that was, but this is the psychological weaknesses. They've got a number of psychological weaknesses in Trump. That is, he considers himself that he's headstrong and overconfident, which makes him, and he believes that he's an instrument of God. This makes him immune to criticism. Trump is supercilious and has overweening pride. You could almost hear the Mandarin words here. And the third weakness is Trump's policy looks to short-term benefits rather than long-term strategic consequences, because he only has one term now. He can't run again. He's only got 4 years. So he's trying to cram everything into 4 years. He's supposedly, according to the Chinese, not looking beyond that. But that is to assume that Trump's a one-man show, that he doesn't have advisors.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have this vice president who's very young, who would like 2 terms of his own, right? If this is successful, Vance is going to be president after Trump. Exactly. And after Trump's one term, you're going to get 2 terms of Vance if this succeeds, if the Americans succeed. This is what the Republican establishment wants, because it means their governance of the country is going to continue. And of course, they know, many of these people know the United States is sunk. We get a Kamala Harris. They open that border. They bring in 10, 20 million illegal aliens, and we're never going to have an American government again. We're going to be overrun by foreigners who are going to vote for communism, right? This is what the far left is thinking. And so the Chinese strategists think that Trump is overconfident in his negotiating abilities. They see him as relying too much on trade, economics, and talking his way through problems into a better position. Trump always labels himself as unpredictable. The CCP used to think he was unpredictable and be afraid of him, but now they think they have his number.
They think they have figured out the pattern, and then they expect that pattern again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
but also,
and that's it.
I think that this profile, I think this profile is something that the Chinese, it's what the Chinese have probably thought about other Western corporate leaders, some politicians. I think the Chinese, they kind of view us in general as these silly, individualistic creatures that don't have a sense of the commune and the doing everything for the masses, being a little wheel in a big machine and all that. So I think they view Trump as a more extreme form of other business leaders in America, selling things to China or moving production to China over the years. But what happened over the years, China got addicted to us. We got addicted to China to a degree, but I think they really got addicted to us. And so did Russia. When they could invest in the West, Russia could get away with things. And Russia didn't feel the need to create a better system over there. Russia didn't feel the need to to reduce corruption and improve innovation and improve production. Russia got addicted to us. And now that Vance and others, they're turning the faucet more and more off. And now it's like Russia is like a drug addict who's running out of supply. China is like a drug addict who is running out of supply because there's less and less Western money propping up China. They got addicted to us. So I don't think Western elites are that short-sighted. Western elites are not that self-centered.
Let me. It almost sounds, when I'm looking at this Chinese analysis, it sounds like they're using something similar to Vilfredo Pareto's Mind and Society. It's a multi-volume work by the Italian economic sociologist, political scientist Vilfredo Pareto. He basically had this analysis where he said there's basically two personality types, which also affects politics and civilizations. He says there's the lion and the fox. He gets this from Machiavelli. In Machiavelli's Prince, Machiavelli says that princes must know how to be human beings, but they must also know how to be beasts. And of the beasts, the princes must know how to be a lion to drive away the wolves, and they must know how to be foxes to avoid traps. They need to be both. But Machiavelli says that people tend to be one or the other. It's rare that you find a leader who can combine both the lion and the fox. And of course, the question is whether Trump is a lion and a fox. And that's an interesting question, because what Pareto says, and he's got a lot of articles, is what he implies is the Roman Empire is his example he goes to often in his work. And he says the Roman Empire was, the Roman Senate was a council of lions. And he says early in a civilization or an empire, a political formation, it is built up by the lions. And the lions are kind of stupid. They're just all about being courageous.
One-dimensional, yeah.
Yeah, well, and he says, but over time as they become successful, the foxes start getting in. And everybody gets comfortable. And then the foxes are not about fighting. They're not about, winning battles and destroying. Yeah, they're about negotiating, right? Which is what you were saying. They see these Western corporate leaders. It's about negotiating. It's about making a deal. It's about talking. Talk. Yeah. So then you get, Pareto famously goes to the end of the Roman Empire and he says, these people are all talkers. They're all bureaucrats. They're all businessmen. What do? Instead of fighting the barbarians, they bribe the barbarians. They start paying the Germanic barbarians not to invade the empire, which of course the German barbarians say, oh, we'll take the money.
Yeah.
We'll take the money. And then, we'll invade anyway. Well, let's just take the whole thing, because all they can do is pay us. And it's like these letters from this Roman diplomat going to the court of Attila the Hun. And you take over now from here.
Exactly. So, this is, I think that, we will finally at some point be able to tell what was a rug pull and a blindside. And it's like when Trump became president for the first time, he seemed a bit like a caricature. He seemed like what some countries think of when they think of Americans, right? The brashness, the bluster, all that caricature stuff. I mean, of course, people like this exist. There are self-centered, business people, larger than life creatures. These people exist, but the rest of the world, they got this cliche idea of Americans, right? The crazy capitalists, the short-sighted people that only care about themselves.
They're the businessmen who just want to talk and aren't going to ever fight. And there's some truth in this. I think during the Cold War, we see there's some truth in it. Pareto's onto something, but are we out tricking them? Are we? Is Trump a lion and a fox? That's the question
Mm.
that I got to leave everybody with. But I have to go. It's the end of the show. And did you have more? Did you have something more you wanted to cover?
Well, maybe the last thought I would give the people is this. There is, I mean, I think one of the biggest blindsides that the Nazis felt was the level of American production and the level of American innovation, because there was this cultivation of a cliche idea about Americans, right? And the Nazis, they wanted to believe the cliches. And some of the Americans, they were feeding into those cliches so the Nazis would believe them more. And so the idea was, in the high Nazi circles, that Americans are self-centered. They're too different. It's a multicultural society in decline,
we're
blah, blah, blah.
soft and individualistic, and we can't ever pull together to be a nation at war.
Yeah, and they don't have a real sense of empire, and they're just stupid and weird, and they're too fond of entertainment and beer and all that. And so once the war production was ramped up, this, I think, was kind of one of the biggest blindsides to the Nazis when they saw what Americans were capable of. And for a long time, Americans, or the American leadership, they didn't want the world to know what America was capable of. They wanted to play a certain role because it was safer to not be seen as a threat for a specific time. So I think that we always have to consider these things, and there's going to be some serious rug pulling, I think, in the coming months and coming years.
Yeah, who pulls the rug out from under who? That's the question. All right, I'm Jeff Nyquist, and with me has been Alex Benesch. This has been Friends and Enemies. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll join us next week for another episode.